Perfect.
Okay, yes, okay. So, welcome, Francis.
Thank you.
Thank you for accepting the invitation. And you're going to present Palantir.
Listen.
So, give us like a brief overview of what this company does and what products or services they're selling.
Perfect. Perfect. Thanks. Thanks again, Costas, for having me. So essentially, I think Palantir is pretty well known right now on the pretty much on FinTweet today. Palantir essentially they provide big data and analytics for clients. I think that's possibly one of the best ways to understand Palantir. They provide data analytics and artificial intelligence related solutions for their clients. Um, Historically, Palantir would have consultants, so they call them forward deployed engineers who would actually go on site to a client site to actually help build artificial intelligence models, data analytics for them. But over the last couple of years now, they've been able to do a lot of that through their software. So that's the best way of understanding Palantir. Data analytics for clients as a custom package. And not only are they doing this for clients or just individual businesses, they're actually doing this across industries as well. So building a general analytics pipeline for an entire industry. So Palantir has three softwares, and I think everyone pretty much knows this. They have the Gotham software. This is for the government clients. It's popularly known as the operating system for the U.S. government, right? Just because Palantir's software is heavily used across the U.S. government today. Um, they also have the Foundry software, which is for their commercial clients. And this has been getting a lot of steam lately and appears to be where most of the growth for Palantir is right now. Although the biggest growth still comes from your government clients. And then the third software Palantir has is Apollo. So the Apollo, you could think of Apollo as the brain. It's kind of the brain, the software brain that connects Gotham and Foundry to all of their clients. So essentially, Palantir, Gotham, Foundry, and Apollo, these are the core software, the core business lines of how Palantir is really broken down. So I think everyone knows about them. So I'll maybe just talk a little bit more about what are some of the key competitive advantage that I think Palantir has. Why are they positioned to really capture a major share of the artificial intelligence landscape over the next couple of years? So I think the very first reason would be the nature of how Palantir builds their software. And I think right from the early days, if you read about the early days of Palantir and early days with Peter Thiel, Joe Lonsdale, and some of those early founders, they built the software. Um, how do I put this? They put it in such a way that they focused a lot on the most essential part. It's like this, and I think everyone knows about this is one of Peter Thiel's biggest quotes. It's about the 0 to 1 mentality, right? He built something that deals with the foundational elements of a particular software. It's like going from ground zero. So they built it in such a way that they take care of a lot of the foundational element of what's required to truly build a fully integrated, well integrated data analytics platform for an enterprise, for a modern day enterprise. And how could you scale that across an entire industry? So that's one of the pieces, and I'll maybe come back to a couple of those later on. But they built in such a way, anyways, that it's extremely sticky. And once you install Palantir into a company, it stays there for a long time. And this is their secret. This is how they've been with the government. I mean, Palantir has held the government hand for over 15 years, I believe, or 16 or 15 years, ever since they started. They've been with the government for that long, and people probably wonder why and why. And it just shows how sticky and how they built the software in such a way that it takes care of the foundational elements of what you need to have a fully integrated AI strategy. So the first piece is just it's extremely sticky, and I think the stickiness is really evidenced by the contract duration and size of the contract. So today, the average deal size for Palantir is roughly about $8 million from each of their clients. Like, think about that. Like, that's huge. That's the average. And then on the higher end of things, you have roughly about $10 million. And for their and for their top 20 clients, it's about $36 million on average for those clients. So you have this extremely huge contract size that people are actually paying Palantir for. They have, and for those deal sizes that I just talked about, they have the average contract duration is roughly about 3.7 years for where their clients are actually signing contracts for. So you have a huge duration together with huge deal sizes. And actually it's a lot higher for the commercial clients. It's about 4.6 years on average. So there's a lot of revenue and dollar based visibility into the company. And when you actually look across the SaaS industry today, Palantir has the highest revenue per customer across the industry. I think Viva is probably next, CrowdStrike and a couple of those other clients, but they have the highest revenue per customer. Meanwhile, they actually have the lowest number, right? They have the lowest number of customers today. I believe their total customer size is roughly about 149 customers across. That's all the customers they have, you know. So it just tells you how it just shows the viability of the model. And I think an interesting fact for people to know is Palantir had 0 people on their sales team as of 2018. Like, so they had, like, they essentially had no sales department up until 2018. And only in 2018, 2019 did they actually begin scaling up and building up their sales team. So I think it just shows the future and how much runway. And actually, this year now they're accelerating their sales team. This year, I think they're actually planning on increasing that to over 100 sales people on the team. Like, I think they said triple digit numbers. And so it just shows you there's quite a lot of room to run for this company going forward. So that's on the sticky side based on the average contract duration, the deal size. In terms of the second piece that I think is a major competitive advantage, which is the Palantir's the partnerships they're building. So I've written extensively about the new partnership with IBM Cloud Pack. So they have a new partnership with IBM. For this is Cloud Pack for Data AI. So you could read more about that. I have a lot of pieces about that both in my blog as well as my Seeking Alpha articles, as well as they also have a partnership with Amazon AWS for helping enterprises build their enterprise resource planning software program. So they have this key partnership that actually unlocks different avenues for growth. And the third competitive advantage I think Palantir has, and this is something I just found out recently and I wrote about it, was is Apollo Edge for AI. So this is something they just launched out for their new commercial clients. It's gaining significant amount of interest. I hope my microphone's clear. Yeah, my microphone's good here. It's gaining a huge amount of interest among the commercial clients. And for people who don't know what Edge Networks is, I think we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, but it's this whole notion of having distributed servers across the globe, or it could be across the state or province, where you could actually, and in this case of AI, you could actually perform advanced AI modeling across these distributed servers rather than actually using your central server from your main cloud providers, right? You have this, it's almost this, this is the new paradigm of where software is going, right? this whole notion of distributed and decentralized services and microservices of software. And this is how Cloudflare and Fastly really got successful in the CDN content delivery network space. So, anyways, with Palantir, what they're essentially doing here is they're using these micro models. I hope my microphone's good. Yeah, they're using these micro models, decentralized services to actually help their clients operationalize AI um, at scale, and this is quite largely so customers now could actually train, manage, and deploy multiple independently um, machine learning models on the edge with ease now. So Palantir actually enables all of this. They don't have to rely as much on a Akamai or a Cloudflare to actually help them. And so customers now could break down compute and AI tasks into multiple different models. And it just enables customers to have a lot more speed, um, and being a lot more dynamic, a lot more flexibility. And this is all tied to the rise of IoT devices, smart factories, autonomous vehicles, asset tracking. So, um, I wrote I think I put a piece out for people to read. I put a thread out so you could actually go and read more about that. But essentially, what this just does really is it increases Palantir's vertical integration across the whole analytics landscape. And what do I mean by that? It means they built the software in such a way that they don't need to rely as much on third-party clients, right? They don't have to rely on other legacy partners. So today, as of today now, Palantir actually, all of their software actually helps with the foundational elements such as data integration, data management of how you gather data from legacy systems. So you have data integration, they have that component of their software. They have a data visualization component of their software where you have a low code, no code, where you can actually visualize, put data into graphs. They have a cloud subscription service with their actual packaged data. They have the actual predictive analytics, the machine learning aspects that you actually do need for AI. They have a cybersecurity aspect of things. So they just recently launched Purpose. It's called Purpose Access Controls. And this is all new areas of data security and data governance. And then now, as I just talked about, they have edge networks, right? So when you think about data AI across the whole landscape, these are all the key elements, and Palantir hits the nail across all of those areas. So it just shows how powerful this platform is, and obviously why it is pretty sticky. In terms of the financial side of things, I think people know this, so I won't go into as much details here. But essentially, you have in 2020 they grew revenue about 47% year over year, and then in Q1 they grew revenues by 49% year over year. But what I would actually like to highlight the most, and this is maybe the key insight, because you could read all of this, is the improved margins. So the margins have significantly improved, as well as the cash flow margin. So Palantir now, the group gross margins are about 83%, and this is higher from about 70s to about the 60% last year. So this is gross margins. Contribution margins today are about 60% from about 41% from last year. Right now, they have about 34% adjusted operating margins. This is coming from negative last year, as well as they made some new adjustments to how they collect cash. And as a result of that, they currently have this last quarter, they have about 44% adjusted free cash flow margins. So the margins all across the business is significantly improving, and it just shows because they've actually invested a lot into the software elements of the platform. Because most people, some of the drawbacks people will tell you is just how much human labor, or maybe how much they need to have consultants, which they call forward deployed engineers, actually going to help clients with maybe managing these AI models I just talked about. But over the last few years, or the last couple of years, they've done a lot more to do a lot of that through software based. And that's why you see this huge aspect of growth in the margins for the business. So these are some of the bull cases. In terms of risk factors, the biggest pushback people will tell you, as I just mentioned, that first piece I just talked about is the software element versus how much human labor you actually do require. So that's the first piece. And as I just showed, a lot of those margins show that the company is becoming more of a software company rather than having more of that consulting overlay. I think the other parts that people would, the risk factors, the second piece would be customer concentration on the commercial side of things. And in terms of customer concentration on the commercial business, people will tell you the business isn't, that aspect of the business isn't growing as much. And that's fair. Yes, it isn't growing as much. But as I just showed, they're only scaling up their sales team only this year. And so I expect over the next couple of years, you should see a lot more growth on the commercial side. And then I think the other piece would be in 2020, the business actually, they were focused a lot on COVID-19 and helping a lot of the government clients. And so that's why they didn't do a lot more on the commercial side. So that's another aspect of things that I see the business improving on. But obviously, there is a lot of execution risk, especially with the valuation and so on right now, that obviously I'll caution about. So those would be some of the risk factors I could identify. But just to summarize and kind of wrap up the section, I think overall, I think you have a huge tailwind that's actually coming from data analytics due to the digital transformation we actually got in 2020. And based off the competitive advantage I just talked about with how sticky the product is, key partnerships across the industry, Apollo Edge for AI, the vertical integration across, just having a platform that solves your data visualization, cybersecurity, data integration, cloud, and edge networks piece. I think you have a company here that's well positioned to capture all the tailwinds from AI over the next few years. You combine that together with the revenue growth, the accelerated margins, and then obviously the management team are some of the smartest people. I mean, Peter Thiel is probably one of the godfathers of businesses in the US. Who is the chairman? So you combine all of these, and I think you have a company that's highly, highly well positioned to capture a major share in the AI revolution over the next couple of years. And so that's my piece. That's my section of Palantir. I could go on, but I'll be happy to take on any questions later on, or if you want to just send me a tweet.
I have one, but if anyone else wants to ask a question, they can request the mic, or if one of the speakers. My main question was, you mentioned that they started having a sales team, but since their products are only tailored to a small number of big governments and big corporations, are they having any plans to expand with products for mid-sized businesses or small businesses or individual users?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that's another pushback people do give Palantir. Yes, I would say yes. So I also wrote about demo day. They had a demo day where one piece that the Palantir now offers to their clients is they've broken down the software into modular pieces. So modular pieces in the sense that, as I just told you, I mentioned all the elements of how Palantir is vertically integrated. But one piece now is they're breaking that into chunks. So they're breaking down into those modular different aspects, whereby if medium-sized businesses actually wanted just a component, so maybe they just wanted maybe example could just be the predictive analytics aspect of things and the data visualization solution. That's all the small business needs. They have a way of actually tailoring that to a specific client. And so they did demo a couple of these quite recently in the demo day. And I think that's an aim towards capturing moving down market, so moving down to those medium-sized businesses. So yeah, that's something I do see, as well as I just mentioned on the last earnings call. They did mention the plan this year. One of their biggest spending would be on marketing and sales, and so they would be accelerating their marketing team this year. And I think what you're going to get with that is they're going to demo a lot more of their products to more Fortune 500 companies. And so I do expect to see more on the commercial side. And I think going forward, um, the government aspect of the business would make up less part of revenues.
Okay, thank you. I think I have another request from someone. Let me see to speak. Ernest Kaplan, he wants to ask a question. Oh, hello.
Hello. Hi. Francis, thanks very much for your talk. It was hell of a great. I haven't had a chance to look at Palantir in any detail, but you know, can you do we have any sense of the competitive situation here? You know, who are they? Who are their direct competitors? Do we know?
Yes, that's another question that people do ask. You see, it's really interesting, and I think this is one of the key aspects of Palantir is, and that's why you rarely ever hear them being compared to, like maybe an example today from our discussion today is like within the semiconductor space, you would usually want to compare AMD and maybe NVIDIA, or freelancing, you have Upwork versus Fiverr. You have those Fastly versus Cloudflare. However, for some reason, within the software space, you rarely ever hear Palantir being compared to any other platform. So I think the biggest maybe competitor, and they're not even close, is C3 AI. So C3 AI does have a similar kind of vertically integrated software, similar to what Palantir offers to the clients as well. They would be the closest. However, their platform isn't as sophisticated as Palantir, right? They're not reaching a whole. They have some of the components of what Palantir has, but they're not reaching. They don't have like the data integration, right? The software isn't as complicated to perform data integration capabilities as Palantir has, and so they don't. That's one element. So C3 AI would be one, but as I said, they don't have some of the sophisticated element of what Palantir has, especially doing this for over 20 years, right? They don't have a lot of the security advanced features that the Gotham software, that's the government aspect, has, So that's one. Apart from that, Microsoft would sometimes be compared to Palantir. That's another competitor that you often hear, just because you know Microsoft has a visualization component. They have a security element. They have a lot of the data ingestion aspect of things. So in terms of in summary, I think in terms of the competitive landscape, there isn't a core competitor against just because of how well vertically integrated they are across the whole landscape, right? Both in government as well as in the commercial side, it's really hard to compare them against any player. But obviously, Snowflakes obviously would take market share from them on the ingestion and data preparation stage, right? You have Databricks who could take some market share. So there's different MongoDB. You have different of those different components. Yes, they could take market share from them. However, when you're thinking about a full integrated platform, it's just very hard. I wouldn't say they don't have any, but it's just hard to compare any to them.
Okay, and one last question that I got from a DM about Palantir is how do you feel about Palantir mentioning a course system being created in the future to teach more people how to use the software to its fullest potential?
Could you repeat the first aspect of that question? A ghost software?
How do you feel about Palantir mentioning a course system being created in the future to teach more people how to use the software to its fullest potential?
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that's it's a made good development. I think what you have with that aspect I talked about early on about how early into Palantir years they required a lot of forward deployed engineers, and they still use a lot of them today to actually handhold their clients, right? When a new client comes in to set up the analytics, you have these engineers going in to help. However, as I mentioned, over the last couple of years with Apollo, which they have this is the software component of the software, they've reduced a lot of those because now you could do a lot more through software. You don't actually have to have more engineers. And so obviously with this course, obviously that they're actually launching to actually help people understand the platform better and all of the capabilities. I think you would have obviously it would reduce a lot of reliance on those engineers, which obviously would help those margins going forward. And I would say the platform is pretty complicated. It's a sophisticated platform. It's not something that's quite easy to use on, but so if they're quite successful, that I could see that being quite successful for the company, and most especially those operational gross margins that I did talk about earlier on.
Okay, thank you, Francis. That was like an excellent and very detailed presentation. So next one, since we're running a bit on tight on time, will be Brad. He's going to present Upstart. So welcome, Brad.
Yeah, and just want to echo, great job, Francis. I mean, with B2B companies like Palantir, it's a lot more difficult to gauge how good of an investment it is versus the more consumer facing companies, and one of them I'm about to talk about. So that was awesome. I learned a lot. Thank you for that. Moving on to Upstart. So Upstart is a company modernizing the $3.6 trillion consumer loan industry, and they're doing it via data, automation, convenience, and affordability. They're using all these buzzwords like AI and ML and data flywheel. So they are saying all of these things that we want to hear. We hear them from a lot of companies, and for this one particularly, it makes sense to me, and I'll explain why, and then you can kind of decide if it makes sense for you. So here's their mission statement, which I think summarizes what they're trying to do pretty clearly. So this is a quote from Dave Garrard. Simply put, credit unlocks opportunity and mobility, and thus the price of credit equals the price of the American dream. This is why we founded Upstart. So a little bit corny, but I think it gives you a sense of what they are really trying to do, and what purpose they see themselves filling in the future. So the problem today is the loan approval process is quite antiquated. We've all heard of the predatory loan system. We've heard of access to credit being systemically unequal. It's mainly because 90+% of creditors are still using a FICO score as their main vehicle to assess creditworthiness. They've gotten better over time, but they're still using a maximum of 30 data points, and we'll get into what Upstart does better there in a second. So just to kind of quantify this for you, less than half of Americans today, and this is where Upstart is predominantly operating, can secure affordable loans, yet 80% have never defaulted. So there's this large disconnect between affordability and inability to pay in the eyes of creditors that Upstart's really trying to address. So the fix. Upstart uses an AI model to collect and digest more data. So kind of, I know this sort of sounds confusing and like a black box, but just think of a gigantic 15 billion cell Excel spreadsheet, and that is really what they're working with. So the company can take in 1,600 plus unique data points. They were working with 23 as of 2014, about a person, about their environment, about their life, and they can do this all in the time a banker asks for that FICO score we were talking about earlier. Again, banks have gotten much better, but still, the best competition from a legacy bank is 30 data points versus 1,600. Machines can handle absurd amounts of non-cookie cutter data that we simply can't. No fault of our own; it's just who we are. So Upstart can inherently make this a less one-size-fits-all approach, and I will hit on what that means in terms of better loans in a second. But how Upstart makes money. So Upstart aggregates consumer loan demand and directs it to its 15 versus 12 at the IPO banking partners. 98% of Upstart's revenues come from fees of loan procuring cause, not underwriting. They're collecting referral fees, platform fees, servicing fees, and just 2% of Upstart's loans are funded by its balance sheet. So they are sourcing loans, they are sending loans to legacy banks, but rarely are they actually funding them themselves. So this makes them extremely asset light, and it makes the stakes for, on one hand, it makes the stakes for appropriately quantifying risk a little lower for them, but at the same time, they are servicing banks that are only going to use them if they are far better in terms of loan metrics, and that's really the root of Upstart's value proposition. So how Upstart makes money continued. Users can secure a loan directly from upstart.com with one of its banking partners supplying the funds. This is Upstart's main revenue channel with, and I quote from the S1, the majority of borrowers referred to bank loans through upstart.com. Increasingly, however, users can secure a loan through a banking partner. So think about Upstart kind of behaving almost as Shopify here, but building banks a loan product with a private label approach that Upstart is powering with their own AI model. So these are bank branded loans powered by Upstart. And then banks can kind of adjust and redefine their risk parameters a little more specifically than they can doing it through upstart.com here. So here, and that kind of gets me into one of the first risks that we'll hit on. So Cross River Bank is one of their 15 banking partners. It is by far the largest banking partner in terms of revenue. So it was 65% of total revenue. They collect a lot of fees from Cross River Bank as of their last quarter, but that is down from 90% a few years ago. So that is a concentration risk that I still am concerned about. But as they add more and more banking partners, and it's taken them just 6 months to grow that count by 25%, that risk should kind of fade and go away. So the value creation, why is Upstart, why do people care about Upstart? Why are users going with it? And all this data I'm going to give you is from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. It is not from internal Upstart data. So you don't have to take it with a grain of salt is what I'm saying. So Upstart delivers for banks a 25 or 27% higher approval rate. And for users, it delivers a 16% average lower APR, so annual percentage rate on loans. There are zero prepayment penalties, faster access to capital. The cash is received 1 business day after the loan is approved 99% of the time. And 58% of these loans can be requested and approved from mobile phones. So that kind of funnels into what opportunity Upstart is working with today. And it's growing very quickly. So Upstart's primary market is the unsecured personal loan market. This is growing at a CAGR of about 8% year over year. It's 118 billion in total size, and Upstart has about 5% of a market share with this. That's exciting, but where it gets more exciting is Upstart is using this software, this AI ML, and I'm using air quotes because I know those are cliches, and I know some people are rolling their eyes, but it makes sense here based on the improvement to loan metrics they're delivering. But they are now venturing into auto loans, which has a $625 billion TAM. They're venturing into credit cards, which has a $363 billion TAM, and even house secured loans, which are mortgages essentially. But they would be mad at me for saying those are the same thing, which is a $2.5 trillion TAM. So it's really we're really in the first inning of Upstart's ubiquity. So far, so good. They have a very, very long way to go, and that kind of works well into how they're performing financially. So their 2020 year over year comps revenues grew 42% year over year. If you think about it, they're working in the consumer loan industry. COVID-19 led to an economic collapse, and economic activity and loan volume is very, very heavily positively correlated. So they while a lot of these high growth tech names were really boosted by COVID-19, this was and I quote from the CFO, Sanjay Datta, severely adversely impacted. So they still delivered a 46% contribution margin versus 31% year over year. They still delivered a 13% EBITDA margin versus 3%. And they still delivered a positive GAAP net income margin, which we don't see very much with high growth companies. But the 2021 guide is kind of where things get more exciting. So last quarter, they kind of blew Wall Street away, and they raised their revenue guide by 30-something% to 500 million, which would represent 114% growth year over year. And then they saw that raise, and then this last quarter, a few weeks ago, they took that from 500 million and they raised it another 20% to 600 million. So they're now expecting 157% growth, and this kind of coincides with a 41% contribution margin and a 10% EBITDA margin. So they're really showcasing profitable growth, and most recently 8% GAAP net income margin, which is the most pure, most difficult profitability metric we can measure. So they are delivering this triple-digit growth, and they are doing so extremely profitably, which is pretty refreshing. So why does Upstart work? Upstart's models are constantly improving over time. So a 2018 study showed that they can nearly 3x bank approval rates while holding losses constant. So this flows directly to banks' bottom lines, and they've improved dramatically since then. So that's where that data flywheel cliche kind of comes into effect, and this is a good branch into management commentary from last quarter. So conversion rates are their main kind of barometer for how they're doing in terms of converting interest into dollars, and this is defined by loan secured divided by APRs requested. That spiked from 8% in 2017 to 14% last year to 22% this year, which is trending well above where they'd like to be. And this was fueled by an updated and streamlined verification model to reduce user friction and to make kind of requesting and getting a rate easier with Upstart. So to them, this is their cue, which kind of is crazy considering their guide. This is their cue to sink their teeth even more aggressively into growth. So they don't need a 22% conversion rate in order to thrive. They can see that going down to 19 or 18%. And the volume increases from that, from the increased marketing spend, more than offsetting the unit economic losses. So exciting stuff there. I'll go into valuation now, and then probably do some management talk, and then risks. So I don't speak too long. But so valuation, we're talking about triple-digit growth, and it trades for 14 times 2021 sales. That's EV to sales, not price to sales. But with the margins, it trades for just 33 times contribution profit and 140 times EBITDA. So it's not cheap. In no world is this stock cheap. But if it continues posting the performance that it's telling us, it's guaranteeing us that they're going to post this year, then there's a lot to like here. And I should say that this 150% growth number that they're expecting for 2021, that is kind of that is their backlog unloading, if you want to think about it like that. So 150% growth in 2022 or 2023 is really not realistic. That number is probably going to fall well below 100%, but there's a lot to like, even at that 42% number that they posted during the heat of the pandemic. So moving on to the leadership team, the founders created Upstart 9 years ago, and it was originally an income sharing agreement platform, which didn't scale at all, and they pivoted into this unsecured consumer loan product. So the CEO and co-founder, Dave Garrard, he was the former president of Google Enterprise, so casual, senior vice president of product and marketing at Virage. He was a product manager at Apple, and his Glassdoor rating is 97%, which beat Doug Hirsch for my highest Glassdoor rating among CEOs of companies I own, who is the CEO and founder of GoodRx. So SVP of product and data science is Paul Gu. I try not to get intimidated by this guy every time I read his resume. He's impressive. He comes from D.E. Shaw, which is the land of Mr. Bezos. Risk analysis is what he did there. He underwrote for 2 nonprofit micro lenders while he was in undergrad. I had trouble waking up before noon while I was in undergrad, so you can kind of get a sense of who he is as a human being. He was a 20 under 20 Teal fellow. He was Forbes 30 under 30. And his idea, this is his brainchild, was inspired from his inability to access affordable credit. So I like to hear that personal touch. Other executive team highlights: the CFO comes from Google, where he was the VP of finance. The general counsel comes from PayPal, where she was the general counsel. Board of director highlights: a Rakuten executive, a managing partner at Third Point, and the former StubHub president. The ownership kind of reflects bullish views on the company. 12 owners and directors own 25% of the float total. Garrard by himself owns 17%, and the top 3 hedge funds, which are Third Point, Stoneridge, and Culsa, own 30% of the company. Total is around 50%, but different data sources give you different metrics. And then headed into the last part, which is risks, which are super important to talk about. We talked about how CRB is their largest banking partner, and Credit Karma, which is owned by Intuit, is their largest traffic generator. So they are responsible, or were responsible, for 53% of loan originations last quarter versus 48% year over year. So they are essentially directing a lot of traffic to Upstart. And so it's a non-exclusive agreement. Credit Karma has recently started directing traffic to other loan aggregators that compete with Upstart. And then interestingly, the two signed a brand new agreement 6 months ago, and then Intuit bought Credit Karma just 1 month later. So this relationship is pretty. I would classify it as pretty darn fragile right now. It's not super unrealistic to think Intuit's going to try and do this themselves. It would be kind of a natural extension of their product offering, but based on the guide and the continuous raises to revenue guidance that the company continues to deliver, it doesn't really look like that is hurting them all that much at this point in time. Other risks. So rising yields, we often think about that being a good thing for banks. They make more money per loan, but important to keep in mind, Upstart is collecting volume-based commissions. So as these loans become less affordable, the volume will probably go down, and that is bad for Upstart. It's not good for Upstart. The other thing is it's vital for them to maintain this APR default and approval rate lead. That is the core of why banks work with them. If that wasn't there, Upstart would be irrelevant. And just to kind of update you on where they are, I told you 16% APR lead and spike to approval rates by 27% and default rates go down. Though they didn't really quantify the expansion of these leads in their recent earnings call, but they did say that those leads are getting larger with the introduction of the blended algorithm that they introduced last quarter. Future growth opportunities, and then I will wrap things up for some questions. So Upstart currently offers auto loan refis, saving users a mean of $72 a month. That was in 1 state last year. It's now in 33 states. And to kind of expedite this entrance into the auto industry, they bought Prodigy Software a few months ago, which, according to them, 6.8x's their loan total addressable market. So I do take this with a grain of salt because, I mean, even in their most developed product offering, they're still at 5% market penetration. So TAM gets people really excited, but it's a long-term run rate maturity type of thing. So Dave Garrard referred to this Prodigy deal as kind of the Shopify for dealerships. I'm using air quotes again. It kind of reminds me of Amazon of blank, but it essentially builds digital loan products for auto dealerships, and this was their most affordable entrance into auto. It would have cost them more to start from scratch, and they saw Prodigy as good bones to kind of build this auto offering on top of. Future growth opportunities, in addition to that, build on the 62% trailing loan CAGR, add more banking partners like they've been doing in the last few months. Spanish language product version. So this was interesting to me, not something that I often considered, but loan products are not super, they're not super bilingual, I guess. They don't really offer an easy solution for Spanish speaking people to sign contracts and to read through these extensive agreements in their native tongue. And that's kind of ridiculous when you're making a decision that's going to impact your financial livelihood. You don't fully understand what you're signing. So they're introducing a Spanish language product version. When I first heard about this, it didn't seem like a huge deal, but apparently this is one of the first product types in this category, which is pretty darn interesting. The other thing is international expansion, which they're very early on. They're very much so focused on the United States. And yeah, that kind of gives you the overview of Upstart, and happy to field any questions.
Okay, that was a great presentation. I have one question, but let me see if in the DM someone asked anything or Ernest again has requested, so let me have him ask a question first.
Brad, that was a fantastic overview. Appreciate it. I've got 3 questions for you. The first one is, where does Upstart get the data from that they claim to know so much more about the clients to get such better metrics? That's the first question. Maybe we'll take them one by one, because then, otherwise you may forget them.
Absolutely, yeah. Let's one by one is greatly appreciated. So where does Upstart get the data from? So by themselves, their first party data is pretty darn inferior to banking partners. So think about banks sourcing loans for a century plus, and Upstart really can't compete with that. But when a bank partners with Upstart, they're giving them the keys to their data castle, I guess. So most of the data that Upstart is using, it's not a matter of them finding new data that banks don't have access to. It's a matter of them leveraging this data in ways that banks aren't capable of leveraging it at this point in time. I mean, it's always a risk that banks will continue to get better at this on their own and will eventually be able to cut Upstart out. The leads that Upstart's been able to deliver on APR and default kind of serve as evidence that isn't going to happen anytime soon. But I'm kind of rambling now. I think I answered your question.
Yeah. Okay. So they're getting the data. The bank opens up their transactional data to Upstart to do their fancy stuff they're doing, and then therefore they can analyze that customer data better than the banks can at the moment. Okay.
You got it.
Second question is, what have they got, in your opinion, from your reading, that isn't easy to replicate?
Absolutely. That's a great question. So it's difficult for me to say this AI model is 8% better than this AI model, and that is why Upstart is better. So I'm not looking so much at the cause of their AI model. I'm looking at the effects of their AI model. So I'm going to go back to that. That those leads that they're delivering for both banks and for both users, and the win-win I view is very sticky. So as long as they are able to take an identical loan versus a bank and deliver a 27% more frequent ability to say yes to this loan to drive the top line, and a 16% lower rate for that user to be able to enjoy more affordability, I view that as the sticky aspect of Upstart, and I view that as the primary risk, because Upstart must maintain that 16% lead on APR. They must maintain that default lead. Otherwise, there's nothing besides an API and a user interface that these banks can buy from Encino or somebody else to do this on their own.
Okay, thanks. And then the last question is, do you know whether they lock their bank partners into them, or do they allow the bank partners to use other loan originators if they so choose?
So 3 for 3 on great questions. None of these agreements are exclusive. Banks can use other loan aggregators. So kind of like we're seeing Credit Karma venturing off into other options that have relationships with Intuit. Banks can also theoretically do that on their own.
Okay, super. Thank you for the answers. Fantastic, Brad. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I think Ernest asked his first two parts was the questions that I was going to ask. Another one I'm not sure if you're familiar with what exactly, what's their process. Do they have some sophisticated software that they have developed? Do they have some very well-known data scientists that are having leading a great team? What's their competitive advantage in this term? Did they develop their software? Is it just that they can read the data so much better than the others to get insights? What's the one thing that sets them apart?
Yep. So I think I'm risking sounding redundant, but the competitive advantage is that they're taking in all of this data from banks and delivering loans that are more affordable for the users and that are more profitable for the banks. That is the competitive moat. That is the core of the value proposition. And in terms of team, Paul Gu, who I kind of mentioned as the senior vice president of product, he is really the brainchild behind all of these algorithms. These are his algorithms. So it's a little weird for me to say Paul Gu is a competitive advantage, but over the last 9 years of rising conversion rates and expanding leads in all of these loan metric categories that they track, he's proving himself to be a competitive advantage in his own right.
Okay, great. Thanks. That was an excellent presentation, Brad. So then the last but not least, since Duarte is not able to attend, will be Christopher Seifel. He has a very great Substack newsletter where he provides updates on the semiconductor industry. And he's going to present us today the company NVIDIA, which I think everyone, or mostly everyone, is familiar with. So welcome, Christopher.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Good to be here. Did you want me to? I'm not in front of my computer, so I don't have the outline in front of me. Did you want to keep it more of a Q&A, or I can just kind of talk off the cuff?
I mean, what's best for you? Because I don't want to sound like a 20-minute monologue, but if it's better for you, like to present your your talking
And
points, or
would you like me to pitch the company or just give an overview of the company? I can do either or.
no, not pitch the company, just just give us first a brief overview of
Can I
what
just say,
yeah.
Can I say, Chris, just hit us with this knowledge for 15 to 20 minutes. Nothing you can say would be anything but very, very valuable, I think.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that. I try. So, all right, I'll just, if you want, just intervene whenever you feel like I'm rambling or off track.
Yeah.
But I'm just going to kind of go for it. So yeah, no, NVIDIA is a company that I think most of you are familiar with. So what they do is, and let me just start with a misperception here. They are not a hardware company, they are a software company. So NVIDIA is part of the design component of the semiconductor supply chain. They design not only GPUs, which they invented back in, what was it, 98 or 99, but they design other chips that are now part of a platform and a stack that they have created, which really is bringing Jensen's view to the forefront, which is being the platform for all accelerated computing functions. So, with that being said, thinking about what they provide, right? What is their offering to the market? They provide the hardware, so the actual chips themselves, which they design with software from either Cadence or Synopsys. Synopsys is actually reporting after the bell today. They then have TSM, so Taiwan Semi and Samsung actually manufacture the chips. And then they have a partner network and they have a sales team that sells the chips to the OEMs, ODMs, the cloud providers, whoever it may be. They have a really wide end market because their solutions really apply to everyone. So that's on the hardware side. Then they have software. They have the actual algorithms they developed, which kind of go part and parcel with the software. They provide libraries of code to run different functions, as well as the systems and services, which all come together to create somewhat of a NVIDIA package for customers. Maybe I can go back to now CUDA. So CUDA is a programming model and basically the software platform through which users of the NVIDIA hardware stack can write code, can write programs, and build all the functionality needed for whatever the use cases that they have. And thinking about the reporting structure. So the reporting structure is important, right? Because that will inform you of how management thinks of the business. So there are two main segments, which is graphics and then compute and networking. So the graphics part, it makes sense, right? Because like I mentioned, they invented the GPU. So they've somewhat maintained their roots in this parallel processing paradigm, which is building out really the highest quality GPUs in the market. I guess my opinion, and a lot of people that I speak to would say the same thing. You know, it's their GeForce line is what's used for both gaming and PCs. They also have a game streaming, and a gaming platform called GeForce Now. And they have, enterprise workstations. They have virtual GPUs for cloud-based functions. So that's really the graphic side of the business. And then they also have the compute and networking side. So that side's really impressive, and it speaks to their architectural and design prowess, and I think dominance in the market, which is, I think it's 8 out of 10 of the 10 world's fastest supercomputers run on NVIDIA's chips, and I think it's like 70% of all those workloads. So they are the provider of choice for, you could say, the most computationally intensive functions that are out there today. That side of the business also includes just their data center platform, right, for artificial intelligence, other high performance computing functions, the accelerated computing use cases, and then what else? Oh, they have Jetson, which is their kind of robotics platform, and they also have Drive, which is for autos, which appropriately named. And then lastly, this was kind of their last big closed acquisition, which was Mellanox, which is more on the networking side. And so what's interesting about Mellanox, which I can maybe elaborate on later when I talk about maybe their markets, is that the Mellanox acquisition built the capability, and was really kind of their push into developing DPUs. So these data processing units, which they announced Bluefield 3 in the investor day a couple of months ago now. So that's kind of how they report on a segment basis. And then if you dive into their kind of core markets, right? So we talk about gaming first. Gaming, I think they grew gaming revenues like 70%, some staggering number, the last quarter, which was like $2.5 billion of revenue in just the quarter, which is something that's pretty absurd. So they have their RTX series, right? I think the RTX series they launched last year or so. And what's really exciting about that is that only 15% of 10, 15, 20, somewhere around there, really small penetration rate of the users of their install base for the GeForce Now and the gaming side of their business. So there's still a really long runway there for continued penetration for the new line of chips. Then diving into the data center. So let me just back up really quickly. So on the competition side, AMD has actually been doing a great job on their own of taking share in gaming. And then so going to data center, I think they doubled their data center revenue last quarter, year over year. And data center is really where, like I mentioned before, they're really starting to stand out with this really with their release, right, of the A100, which is built on their new Ampere architecture. So the A100 is used for both inference and training for AI workloads. So that's something that's really important to understand, is that their chips, which are then obviously going to be programmed through CUDA, that is what's being really adopted most in the market right now. I mentioned Mellanox before. Mellanox you would group into this end market, if you will, because it's the networking within the data center. What else? I mentioned CUDA, which is really important. They have CUDA X. They have different APIs and SDKs that are all integrated through this platform with their own cloud registry also. So really a lot of exciting things that they're doing and really leading at the edge. And AWS and Google and Azure, Oracle, and all the major cloud providers are partners with NVIDIA. So it just, once again, kind of speaks to their dominance in that end market. Professional visualization's the third market that they kind of sell into, which is, and they just announced Omniverse, which is kind of a new platform for them during their investor day, or the investor day a couple weeks ago. And it's fine. It's exciting. It's really impressive what they can do. I think there's a lot more competition on that side just because if you think about what Autodesk does, and then even like Unity, et cetera, I think there are a lot of other players that are in that market, but their design work software, just based off of the visuals that you can see in the demos they do, it's absolutely remarkable. And they have a big advantage there, which is they're the ones that are designing these chips, so it's the software itself is optimized to run on their chips. And a big thing is ray tracing, right? So ray tracing can essentially simulate the effects of light on objects, which makes everything much more photorealistic. So that's really an advantage I would say that they have in that market, but it's not something that I really think about when I'm like, oh, NVIDIA's dominance. It's not really professional visualization. Last, but certainly not least, is the autonomous driving, which I think has gotten a lot more headlines lately. But their drive platform is really kind of best in class. And it does all the good stuff, right? So on the graphics side, you kind of have the infotainment systems, but then on the compute side, you also have the autonomous mode, which is, I think it's like a level 2 plus right now, if I remember correctly. In my last reading, yeah, I think it was 2 plus. And all the driver assisted work that they can do. So the software defined network of, or platform rather, of autonomous driving is kind of that fourth end market that they focus on. So that's the markets.
So if you could mention like about the management and what
sure.
plans they have for the future.
Yeah, world domination is the easy answer there. So Jensen he founded the company back in 93 or early 90s. And really the focus was originally on PC graphics, and then anything else that was kind of computationally intensive, right? Like anything that was hard for maybe a CPU to do, and any other general kind of compute. But over the years, they've continued to build on top of that initial kind of mission, right? I mentioned that they invented the GPU in the late 90s. And they've really led the entire industry over the past 20 years in really pressing the boundaries of what the GPU can do, and that made them the leader in what they call visual computing, right? So graphics, all that fun stuff. CUDA was invented, or they launched CUDA in really the mid 2000s, which when I was talking to one of the industry veterans that I tried to kind of pick his brain on, he was like, listen, like CUDA, which they've been investing in for like 15 years or so, they kind of got lucky with the timing of that launch. But with that launch, plus all the investments they've been making in their CNN, all the ML libraries over the past, say, like 7 to 8 years, like that's why they're so successful in machine learning in the data centers, because of this high amount of investment in the software. So like that is a really big competitive advantage that they have. I say competitive advantage because it's not a moat in my opinion, but it is an advantage for sure. Talk about CUDA management. Oh, their plans, right? So yeah, I really do think it is essentially world domination, and I think the eureka moment, if you have to kind of trace it back, right? I think it would be 2014 with AlexNet. So with AlexNet, there was basically a realization that if you run GPUs in parallel to CPUs, you can essentially do like the processing speed and the compute power is infinitely more than just using a CPU itself. And AlexNet was really for the AI, and it was really a neural network competition, neural net. But that realization is, I think, what really powered NVIDIA to the forefront of being, I would say, probably the leading chip design company in the world. And just given their prominence and their performance lately, I think that's kind of how you would think about them, especially with Intel falling off. But yeah, so I think that the parallel computing is going to be really critical moving forward. But see, Jensen is so insightful and so he has the foresight to understand where the industry is moving, right? So they forever in a day did not produce CPUs. But as part of the investor day a couple months back, they announced Grace, which is their CPU. So now they're going to have basically a 3-chip strategy between their GPUs. Grace is a CPU, which they'll obviously build off of, and now Bluefield 3, which is a DPU. So why this is so smart is because if you think about the trajectory of chip architectures and chip design, it is moving much more towards a system on chip, system in chip type of design, anything that's heterogeneous integration, because you need to have this heterogeneous integration in order to have better PPAC, right? So better power, processing, area, and cost. So by developing all of these chips internally, right, and having the components of the overall system built by NVIDIA, it is a other way that they can optimize the software platforms that they have built. So it's kind of further entrenching them as the I guess provider of choice, right, for any computationally intensive workloads. So that's kind of their plan. What else did we have in the outline there?
In the latest developments, the Grace data center CPU, the Bluefield 3 DPU you mentioned, new workstation GPU,
Yeah,
enterprise
so maybe
platform.
I can maybe riff a little bit more on the investor day and kind of what they brought to and what they announced, right? So
I think you had a very detailed thread on that, if I remember correctly.
yeah, I was like live tweeting a thread during the investor day. So maybe you can like link to it or whatever it may be. I don't know. But yeah, so the first one was that I think I would maybe talk about is Grace, right? And so Intel, especially with their last earnings report, like their lead in the data center is gone. Like it's so sad to see, but Grace was basically NVIDIA saying like, listen, like we're coming to take over. And so what's so impressive about Grace and the data center product that NVIDIA has put together is that according to the things that I've read, their solution there for and so let me quickly state too. So the CPU is based off of ARM based IP. So it's computationally more simplistic but faster, right? And so it's 10 times faster than AMD's server based processor, which is Epic, right? And so I think it's Epic Rome was their last one, I think, right? Yeah, the latest one's Epic Rome, and I think they're going to Milan, whatever it is. But it's 10 times faster than that. So, they're really set up to continue taking share in that market through the launch of the CPU. What else? Yeah, that's probably it for on Grace. I mentioned the fact that they were going to be integrating CPU, DPU, and GPU, right? So they announced Bluefield 3 also, which Bluefield 3 is their kind of next gen DPU, which I had mentioned was is essentially allowed, right, from the Mellanox acquisition. What else? Yeah, the new workstations.
I think you had the Omniverse, 3-chip Strat, DGX Supercode.
Sure. So Omniverse, I kind of mentioned was. I would actually highly recommend going back and looking at the video that they did with basically going through BMW's what would you call it? Like BMW's like floor for their manufacturing floor. The quality and the detail was just astounding. But basically, it's virtual reality. Is essentially what it is. And so that Omniverse announcement was really exciting, at least to me. It was really impressive. It is competition for Unity and others that are trying to be in that space. Yeah, they had different platform announcements, which kind of just building off of what they had done previously, EGX, DGX, et cetera, et cetera. What else? I'm like throwing on acronyms. Sorry about that. DGX is basically like their AI platform. EGX is for the enterprise. Yeah, and so I do know off the top of my head a lot of the financials because I just had to do a whole big, report, pitch on them, whatever it is. So, but I think it's important first to, if I may, quickly talk about my views on, I guess, investing and valuation. So, NVIDIA is not riding. They're leading. They're leading forward this, I would say, a 10-year super cycle in artificial intelligence, which is still just so early innings. And so, with that being said, you should probably look at NVIDIA as that longer term type of investment, almost like a coffee can ish, I guess, investment. And so over long time periods, I would say that price always matters, but over time periods, the inflection between price paid or valuation, whatever you want to call it, and compounding of underlying fundamentals, like those two dynamics flip, right? So over longer time periods, the ability of a company to compound their cash flows is much more important than what price you pay for the stock. And so the key there is to look at returns on invested capital. That is, at the end of the day, that is the most important metric that you need to look at. And so I'm going to bring kind of two components together. One is that their ROIC for the trailing 12 months, I think, was 20 something percent. Yeah, let's say low 20%, right? Was their ROIC for the last 12 months. But their average over the past 5 years has been mid to high 20%, right? Their returns on capital employed are mid 20s. Their return on equity is 30+%. And so they are able to not only grow and compound off of their established base of capital, right? Which if you think about as a business owner, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to get a higher return on your capital that you've invested into the business. As an investor, the capital that you give to the company, you want high returns on that capital. So crosswalking those kind of metrics, if you will, to what their intrinsic value growth is, which is, if you kind of think about it formulaically, would be your return on invested capital multiplied by your reinvestment rate. So you have how much can you generate in terms of your after-tax profits, if you will. So NOPAT or EBIT, however you want to call it. What return can you generate through your after-tax profits? Then you multiply that by the reinvestment rate. So how much can the company reinvest? And that can then tell you what the intrinsic value growth of the company should be, just as a back of the envelope type of computation. When you factor in R&D, right, which I think you have to do for software or for design companies, because right, NVIDIA has invested $25 billion, $25 billion in R&D since inception. So that is a investment. I would fight anyone argue to the grave on that topic. So when you factor in R&D coupled with net capex plus the changes in working capital, which gives you your kind of investment base, their reinvestment rate is 130%. So they're reinvesting 130% of their cash flows into the business, right? When you do that, you get to a 25 or 26%, whatever it was, intrinsic value growth rate. So there alone is kind of your baseline. What should you expect out of NVIDIA in terms of their compounding capabilities? Then you kind of crosswalk that back to where the company is currently trading in terms of, pick your valuation metric. I don't use multiples in a vacuum, but it's important. What I do is I look at price implied expectations. So based off the price today, what has to happen or what is the market pricing in, right? And so if you just look at consensus estimates, the basically 18 years or 19 years of cash flows are kind of baked in, but that calls for that's based off of a 29% reverse DCF growth rate. So if you take the 29% reverse DCF growth rate, which is on cash flow, and you compare that to the actual expected growth rate of the company's cash flow, which is 38%, you have a arbitrage opportunity there, which is kind of the reason why the company also is compounding their investment returns at 28%, 26%, whatever I just said. So from a valuation and I guess overall business model perspective, the company is one of the best out there. And even though you'd be paying, I don't know what the relative valuation is right now, like on a metric basis, but it's on, I would say, the higher end of their longer term average. You are still, if you're holding over this longer time period, you are still earning a excess return over and above what you would get on just like a standard market-based return, right? So, those are a lot of things that I think about in terms of the valuation. They compound their earnings power. They have 16% earnings power, which is, I calculate as operating profit over assets. So basically their ability to, generate earnings off of just the entire asset base. So yeah, NVIDIA is a very special breed type of company. What else? I can go into like maybe competition and
Yes, I think you mentioned some competitors, but if you can give like an overview of the sector and what sets them apart from the competitors.
Yeah, sure. So, what sets them apart, pretty simply is just it comes down to PPAC, right? Power, performance, area, cost. So their performance is they have better performance, one, but two, it comes down to CUDA. I think that CUDA and having all these developers, like the developer platform, right? Having everybody on CUDA and building software around that platform is essentially lock-in, right? It's a moat. It's what's used by, I don't know, everybody. So not everybody, but it's the predominant tool in the market. So that's kind of their competitive advantage, if you will. I mentioned AMD, which AMD competes with them on, the graphics cards and high performance computing. It's AMD, which I'm including Xilinx in that, because Xilinx would also be a competitor on that front, at least on like the FPGA side, and then Intel also. And so Amazon and those guys, like Amazon's developed their own AI chips, basically. Inferentia is their inference chip, and then I'm drawing a blank on their training chip. Is it Trainium? I think it's Trainium. So like Amazon's a competitor there, for sure. What else? So auto side, right? So anyone that provides system on chips for autos, like Umbrella, Broadcom does it. Renesas also, they were in the news not too long ago with the fire at their facility. I think Samsung does the same thing also. Intel, who else? Yeah, and those guys. What else? Yeah, and then networking side with Mellanox, I think you have companies like Arista and Broadcom and who else? Like Juniper, Marvell, like those guys. They also kind of compete there. So there's competition throughout the industry, but and throughout their end markets. But it really comes down to, do you have the platform to be able to compete? Because if you noticed, very rarely, like AMD doesn't compete with them on all end markets. Nobody competes with NVIDIA on all end markets. They're really just the leader, and it's because their platform and the way they've designed it allows for it applies to any end market. So that's on the competition side. Yeah, and then I mentioned the CUDA as a competitive advantage, and I think you're going to continue to see GPUs be incredibly important, but maybe more of a mix towards ASICs, so the application-specific chips, which, NVIDIA will be right there, like they always have been. And really just as they continue to, and then on the gaming side, right? So gaming has huge tailwinds. I think that's been talked about ad nauseum. And so it really comes down to, like I said, it's the ray tracing that NVIDIA enables, plus just better performance, lower latency, all that good stuff. What else? Just their design and their architecture, right? Like they're very intentional about their cache hierarchy, about the parallelism of the chips, how they run. You could say that about, I would say, most of the chip companies, but NVIDIA does something that I'm just not as I'm not as technologically savvy enough to really know the details yet. Then what else? Yeah, they're just optimized for AI and ML. Like that's what the GPU does. That's what their entire parallel processing platform is based on. So that's the competitive environment, but also almost the reason why NVIDIA is really poised to be the big winner over the next 10 years.
That's great. I have a question here in the DMs by someone for you. If you see any risks related to the US government wanting domestically made chips and less reliance on outsource, because how do you see this impacting NVIDIA since they rely on Samsung and TSMC for production?
I mean, that question would apply to literally any designer, except for maybe Intel. That's kind of one. Two is that TSMC, they had plans to build one plant down in Arizona for a couple $1 billion. It was going to be their 5 nanometer. It was going to be a 5 nanometer node process assembly line, but they recently changed those plans where now it's going to be 5 different facilities, and I believe it's going to be at the 3 nanometer node. So TSM is building more plants here in the U.S., but if the government is not going to disallow the build out or the manufacturing of chips overseas, because that would bring the entire industry and the entire all of civilization to a halt, just because of the amount of capacity right now that is overseas. So it's not possible for that to happen anytime soon, because once again, it takes it takes 2 or 3 years to build a fab. So even these plans that have been announced by Intel, by TSM, by Samsung, who's continuing to build out in Texas, I think also they announced plans in Arizona, if I'm remembering correctly. That doesn't happen overnight. So if there are any changes made to the government allowing or disallowing certain certain geographic regions to manufacture chips, that applies to really everybody, but that would be arguably one of the dumber things. I mean, I think everything's relative, but arguably one of the dumber things that our government's done. And then on that point too, it's hard to explain and have people appreciate how complex the semiconductor value chain is, right? Like, to build a chip takes about 6 months, start to finish, and that chip is sent all around the world. And there can be as many as I think it's over 1,000 process steps, right? So the underlying complexity of the value chain, which has occurred over time because of the inherent efficiencies of having certain regions, having certain companies do certain things to build the chip, right? Breaking everything apart from the IP to the design to the fab to the assembly and test, like everything that goes into it has really been optimized. So if you're gonna start trying to disrupt that value chain, it's gonna have really bad repercussions. The auto or the chip shortage has been kind of front and center for everybody the past, I don't know, like 4 or 5 months, whatever it's been. That pales in comparison to what would happen if the government was like, hey, you can only use domestic manufacturers. That would be a disaster. The entire world would stop.
Okay, I think we have another listener who wanted to ask a question, so let me Dylan, can you?
No, Dylan can't ask questions because he knows infinitely more than I do. Where'd he go? So Dylan. So everyone knows, Dylan is probably the smartest semiconductor analyst that I know. Most of what I've learned is from him, and if you guys follow Mule, who's actually on a trip right now, but Dylan's the guy to go to for semiconductor stuff. So he's gonna ask me. He would ask me a question that I have no clue how to answer. So I'm gonna tell you guys all first. I have no clue to whatever question he was gonna ask me. Listen, like, one thing about me is I'm not afraid to say I don't know. And I'm not gonna blow smoke up your ass. Like, if I don't know something, I don't know it. But I'm not sure where he went. But yeah, just so you all know, like, Dylan's the guy to follow for semiconductor information.
Okay, Dylan, if you have a question or a comment.
Is he in here?
Yeah, I
Let me
gave
see.
him permission. I gave him permission. Just connecting now, but I gave him permission to speak.
He messaged me saying that he likes this and never thought about the invested capital perspective. Thanks, buddy. Not sure why Spaces isn't working. Besides the
I gave him
usual
again
weakness.
permission, so let me see.
There he is.
For some reason, the Spaces microphone wasn't working. I just wanted to ask you a question about automotive, because we really haven't touched on, or at least since I joined, you didn't really touch too much on automotive. What's your thoughts on that prospect there? Sounds like Tesla has their own hardware in-house. Google's developing their own hardware in-house. GM recently started licensing some silicon IP. There's a lot of folks that are going in-house for their self-driving hardware, and then there's stiff competition from Intel's Mobileye and from the from Qualcomm even, who's getting wins as well. So I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on the automotive market?
I would say, actually, so I agree with you, right? Like, it's been readily apparent. So Tesla has been very upfront and honest about their plans to kind of be a closed ecosystem, and so with that being said, and with all the developments that you talked about, right? NVIDIA, I would say that's not going. They have more of an uphill battle to climb there if they're going to have some meaningful penetration. And I will say, though, just kind of thinking back on their product roadmap for their SoCs on the auto side, right? I don't know, and I need to do more work here to compare what they're kind of projecting out for Orin and for Atlan compared to what the actual OEMs are thinking about. But at like 1,000 tops, right? Top, like 1 trillion operations per second. That's pretty substantial, right? And that's a massive increase over the 30 tops that Xavier has right now. So I like I like the potential, I guess, of what they've talked about in terms of their abilities. It's just, for me, like, I don't understand, or I don't know what that means in terms of them having a meaningful share of the auto market.
Performance is one thing. It's being able to collaborate and have the whole ecosystem ready with you. So the interesting thing was their 2025 Atlan. It has some features on there that are not going to be used for automotive. No automotive company wants it. For example, they were putting 400 gigabit Ethernet on that, which is completely unneeded in an automobile, given even a full array of like multiple LiDARs, cameras, radars, etc., is maybe pushing 20, 30, 40. So it is a little confusing why they're sticking 400, but I imagine it's because they're building a chip for more than one end market is my assumption. But
Right.
What is that end market? What is that vision that Jensen Huang has?
So I told you all that Dylan knows infinitely more than I do. Yeah, no, I mean, it's always interesting, right, to see what these visionary leaders announce and what they're doing and how that kind of evolves over time. You could think about a bunch of different use cases for that. But for me, like I have no clue. That would be something that I would lean on you on. I would lean on you for rather than me knowing right now. But it'll be interesting to see. But I do think that you're right with that competitive landscape on the auto side. It's not like they're going to be some dominant provider like they are in the data center and for gaming. If you transpose that to auto, at least from what I see.
Dylan, do you have any other questions, or because I don't see any other questions in my DMs? So
we should have Dylan speak if anything.
Yeah, he can be like in the next one maybe if he wants. So I think we can wrap it up since I don't see any other questions for the speakers. I want to thank again Francis, Christopher, and Brad for making these presentations. They were very informative. Thank you all for accepting my invitation and for preparing this, and hoping to have you in a future Twitter Spaces again. And thanks for everyone who tuned in for this conversation. I hope you got some valuable information from this.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
Thanks.
We have one last question for Christopher, if you have like 1 minute maybe.
Sure.
Like someone is asking, what is happening to NVIDIA if the ARM acquisition gets not approved? Doesn't get approved.
I think the way to think about it is this, and I'd love to hear Dylan's thoughts. If the ARM acquisition gets approved, it's game over. If the ARM acquisition doesn't get approved, it's fine because everything will kind of just continue as it has been. But what was interesting to me in following the investor day was they actually kind of led. It was like one of the first slides where they actually talked about that partnership. And I mentioned, that Grace is built on the ARM IP. And so by talking about the partnership the two of them have together, and I'm remembering like words like turbocharged, and they were talking about the edge, AI, and IoT. If they bring it all in house, then it's almost just like game over. But with that being said, it doesn't change my bull thesis on the company over 10 years. That's more of just a big, just maybe not a game over, but yeah, they'd be incredibly well positioned if that went through.
There is a lot of thought in the community and all over the world that this acquisition is almost surely dead. Just given the size, given the fact that China is going to have a say, and they wouldn't want this IP falling into American arms. So front where I think that there's a possibility that a higher possibility that most people believe because of the turmoil that's going on within ARM China. ARM China has received any IP in 2 years, essentially. The last was the A77. Wow. And right now, in high volume, and the next generation is being sent out now to partners to start integrating for their SoCs. Actually, it's already been sent out, and they're integrating it for SoCs next year. So it's been 2 years since they've received any IP. They have none of the Neoverse server IP either, and it's all because of this clash. Where there's some really interesting articles from all over the place. Financial Times has a good one, I believe. But basically, the head of ARM in China, the joint venture in China, essentially is like hijacked the company. He was one, using his position as ARM's CEO in China as the sole source for ARM's IP in China as a way to raise money for his other ventures, saying, hey, you should invest in this, like in one hand, and negotiating an ARM contract, with some player in China, and on the second hand saying, hey, invest in my company. So some very big conflicts of interest. And essentially he has what's known as the stamp. And if you have the stamp, you essentially have all legal rights over the company, unless you go through a very, very long legal battle, and that could take years. And ARM China's in a kind of precarious position where they don't get any IP right now, and it doesn't look like they're going to get any IP unless this guy backs off, but he doesn't want to back off. Can there be some sort of dealing where, you know, as the acquisition closes, NVIDIA hands over a lot of IP that's newer to ARM China, and then once it's handed over, you know, the U.S. government can't stop it. They sort of can say no, sure, but they can't stop it after it's already been handed over because the IP exists within the entity. So maybe there's some sort of deal there where he kind of has to sell souls to get the crown. So that's that. Everyone else, I think they can make the promises and, you know, job promises in UK, for example, and promising not to, you know, Microsoft style embrace, extend, extinguish the ARM ecosystem. And I think they can get approval everywhere else, but it's ARM China that's the real tricky one. And there's a lot of political happenings there, but it's not as simple as China doesn't want ARM in US hands, because they're not the best position either.
Well, that's great, great insights, Dylan. Thank you very much.
I told you, like, if you want
Yeah,
to talk
you
about
you should
chips,
be one of the
he's your
next
guy.
speakers for sure. I will contact him like right after this.
I
Yeah.
rely on Dylan for a lot of my knowledge. So yeah, if you guys are interested in semiconductors, follow him and you'll get a lot smarter.
Yeah. And I also posted your thread for NVIDIA for the Investor Day in the Spaces. So if like someone wants to take a look, I think it's very detailed.
Oh, great! Yeah, no, I was just kind of live streaming and providing snapshots of the presentation, and yeah, it gives a pretty good overview of a lot of the stuff that they just talked about.
Okay, so thanks again, Christopher. It was a great presentation, and thank you, Dylan, for your input. And thanks everyone else for tuning in. Yeah, so let's do it again sometime in the future, and thank you again.
All right, thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yep, bye-bye.